Republicans refer to preventing default as the only concession they are willing to make. But she said preventing a catastrophic default is not a concession, it's their job. So as someone who is on the inside of negotiations, what kind of concessions are you asking from Republicans to make? And what is the absolute red line for you, given that Senator Schumer said last week that you are not willing to sacrifice your values? So are the veterans that red line that you're not willing to cross? And also I would like to ask you, do you think that former President Trump still has a big say over a faction of the Republican Party that wants America to default? Or do you think that this...
Well, I can answer that question right now easily. Yes. President Trump clearly continues to hold tremendous sway, and that's one of the reasons why we're in this situation, because he has effectively told them to default. Unless the extreme MAGA Republicans can extract painful cuts, such as those that would impact our veterans. That is a red line for us, and let me yield to Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Mark Takano to explain why it's a red line that we cannot cross.
I want to just be clear, without repeating too much of what my colleagues have said about what happened this week. The Milcon VA bill is usually the first up because it's always bipartisan, even when you have two sides voting differently. We craft that bill together. We support our veterans. We support our military service members. That bill's markup was canceled along with the rest of them because the Republicans didn't have the votes, because they didn't want to come to that committee and have that stain on their record of having disrespected and broken the promise that we made a year ago to our veterans to make sure that we were going to protect them from toxic exposures, that we weren't going to have the entire rest of the discretionary budget dollars swallowed up by the cost of their health care. It clawed back $2 billion, a $2 billion rescission from VA medical care. So they are protesting like stuck pigs, in spite of the fact that when faced with the truth, they know that, and the evidence is there, and that's why they didn't have that vote today, because none of them wanted. They can speak really loudly. It didn't change the fact that they would have had that stain on their record, breaking their promise to our veterans, which is in black and white in that bill.
And to add to what Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz has said, what's essentially going on is Republicans are trying to, these so-called negotiations, which I don't believe should be happening. What's coming up before us is the date by which we need to get our bonds sold. We need to make sure that we make good on the bills that we need to pay. But, the government's funded till the end of September. And the vote that they were supposed to take in appropriations was on the Milcon VA bill. They do not have the votes to make the cuts that they are trying to bully the president into making, because they want the president to share in the blame. The president already put out a detailed budget, reducing the deficit, and not only beholden to cuts. So they're trying to bully their way into cuts that their own caucus cannot pass. I would love to see at the end of September them to be able to produce an appropriations bill which actually makes the cuts that they want. I'm going to tell you, this can't happen in 4 days. I authored the PACT Act. It passed last summer, and you will recall that they called the cost of war toxic exposure fund. Senator Toomey said it was a slush fund, and that's why he couldn't support it. Flipped 21 votes in the Senate, high-fiving with Ted Cruz on the floor that they stopped this, and it was only after veterans slept on the Senate steps and shamed the Congress, shamed the Senate into putting the bill back into the House where we finally passed it, that the Republicans knuckled under. We had a bipartisan agreement to not put the cost of war we had a bipartisan agreement to fund the cost of war and not make it compete with the other domestic priorities and not make it compete with defense. The mark they put yesterday, in which they didn't want the stain that they did not want to have on their records, was they did not want the stain of clawing back $2 billion. They didn't want the stain of putting $15 billion into discretionary spending to actually rob veterans of housing, rob veterans of SNAP benefits. They too rely on the domestic side of the ledger. So my thing is, they're trying to bully through cuts that they cannot even get the votes for in their own caucus.
Last question.